And welcome to another KidLit chat. I have the wonderful Sara Ella with me here today. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm well. How about yourself?
Just awesome. And thanks so much for doing this, and thanks so much for hanging out with us. We're really
It's
excited to
my
get to
pleasure.
know you. Yeah. So tell us, for those of us who are watching who have never heard of you, have never heard of your books before, tell us about who you are and what you write.
So I'm Sara Ella, and I write young adult fantasy, fairy tale retellings. There's a little bit of contemporary in there. I kind of like to jump around and mix genres. So I have a trilogy called the Unblemished trilogy, which is about a girl who has a mark on her face. She's from New York City, and it's a portal fantasy. She finds out that this mark on her face is actually kind of the key to her secret superpower. There's a lot of musical and song references in that one, and it explores the idea of true beauty. It's very inspired by all of my favorite fairy tales. If you've ever watched Once Upon a Time, then you would be familiar with kind of that mixing of those fairy tales. And then I have a standalone novel, which is a contemporary with a fantasy spin on it, and it's a retelling or a reimagining of Hans Christian Andersen's original Little Mermaid. But of course, being who I am, I can't help but put some Disney flair in there. So there's definitely those lighter moments. But that story focuses on mental health. And then my new book that is coming out this year in July is a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. It's the first in a two-book series, and it is called The Wonderland Trials, and that releases July 12th. So I'm super stoked about that one.
Yeah. Oh, they all sound so good. I love fairy tales. They're like my favorite. And Once
Me
Upon a
too.
Time is so great. So, what made you
Me
kind
too.
of lean towards that? Is it just because you grew up with Disney, or like what made you want to really focus in on the fairy tales?
Well, definitely growing up, like loving Disney and going to Disneyland obviously sparked some of that inspiration. But it's not just, the loving of going to the theme parks. There's so much depth that can be found in fairy tales, so many hidden meanings, and they're not just for kids. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, one day you'll be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. I really find that as an adult, I see so much more meaning. I specifically remember when I lived in Utah and my librarian, I was looking for new books to read, and she's like, "Well, what do you like to write?" And I'm like, or read. And I was like, "Well, I like to read Harry Potter." And so she's like, "Oh, well, I have some books for you." And she kind of pointed me toward The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, which is a fairy tale retelling. And after that, I was just hooked. And my librarian at that time said something very interesting. She said, I don't really like adult books. I don't think they have as much depth as children's books. and and I would agree. So all of that to say, just that deeper meaning behind fairy tales. And I mean, who doesn't want to be swept away in a world where, anything is possible, where a kiss can break a curse, kind of back to that, once upon a time, with Henry and him believing that, Emma can break the curse. So I love that idea and kind of the believing in the
Yeah. Oh,
impossible.
I love that. And I think that's so true. There is so much depth. And that's probably why we do so many fairy tale retellings. We've been doing these for centuries. Like,
Hmm.
they're so fun.
Right.
I love it. Okay, well then a double question then. It's kind of off the fairy tales because we talked a little bit about Disney. So do you prefer Disney or Pixar? And what's your favorite movie?
That's a really great question. I prefer Disney. I'm a classic girl. I do love my Pixar, absolutely. But I mean, Pixar wouldn't be what it is without those Disney storytellers in there. So
Yeah.
I love Pixar, but Disney, classic Disney, the classic fairy tales, they're just always my favorite. I love the princess stories. And it's hard to decide, but I always normally say Beauty and the Beast, just because I mean that one always makes me cry. But then I'm like, no, wait, but we can't forget about the Little Mermaid, and we can't forget about Cinderella. So I go back and forth, but my go-to answer is generally Beauty and the Beast.
And that library is just so great. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, you also like to go adventuring and things because you mentioned Utah, you live in Arizona right now. So if you could go anywhere, where would it be and why?
Well, I've been to Disney so many times, and not that I mean, I would obviously love to go to like Disney World because I usually go to Disneyland. But I'm going to give a double answer. I'm going to cheat because it's my dream to visit Europe one day and visit Oxford and London. But included in that would be a trip to Paris and Disneyland Paris. And they actually have like the maze from Alice in Wonderland there, and they don't have that at here in America. So I would love to visit Europe and then sneak a little side Disney trip in there.
I love it. Ooh, that sounds so fun. I'd go go on that trip. That's so fun. Okay, well, you seem like a very fun and magical person because, all of the things you want to do. And sometimes as writers, we can kind of get stuck, like people mention all the time, like, I really have this idea, but I don't know how to get started, or I have this idea and I'm kind of stuck in the middle or something like that. So do you have any like routines or tricks that you like to do to kind of get you through, especially when you're writing YA? Your books are so long.
Oh, thank you. They are long. I used to really just kind of like blame writer's block for things. But I think it comes down to that we create our own writer's block. I'm the one who, is given to distraction. One thing that I found that helps, because I'll sit there and I'll think, how did I write my first book like in a year? I like that seems like a long time, but I'm such a slow writer. I'm like, how did I do it now? I feel like it takes me a couple years to get a draft done. And I'm realizing it's because we didn't have all this social media and this constant notifications. I didn't have a smartphone until 2016. And that's when my first book came out. And so I've realized like I have to put my phone in a different room, like not just turn it over. It has to be in a different room, because I have this tendency to, oh, well, I better check and see how many, how my reel on Instagram's doing. Like, oh, I'm waiting for an important email from my agent. I better refresh my email again. Like you think that you stop refreshing your email after you get an agent and a contract, but that is not what happens. I mean, I'm still constantly refreshing my email. Oh, like what's going on with this? What's going on with that? And so I have to eliminate those distractions, because otherwise I'm constantly interrupting myself. And it helps to set a timer too. If you can, if you have to have your phone by you, if you're, my kids are with me all day, so I'm not waiting for a phone call from the school. I homeschool. So if you have to have your phone by you, set a timer and keep that timer up on your phone so you're not hopefully tempted to exit out of your timer. And the problem with smartphones is you can exit out of an app and use a different app. You can use 20 apps at a time. It's not going to stop the timer. And that's like, why did somebody create that? It's caused me a problem. But definitely eliminate those distractions and just like do it. There's no perfect time or ambiance, or we often think of writing as this kind of magical experience where we have candles lit and we have our perfectly hot coffee that hasn't been sitting there for hours because our toddler is like on our hip. Like, I don't remember last time that I finished a cup of coffee that was hot. It always turns cold. So with all of that, like, just know, like, get those little sprints in, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It may not seem like a lot of time, but if you're fast drafting and you're just getting the words down and knowing that you can edit it and perfect it later, which I know is so hard to do because I like perfection the first time around, you'll be surprised how many words you can get down, and make it a priority sooner in the day, because when I put it off, I'm not motivated and I get to the night and I'm like, well, I wrote nothing today. But if I do it first thing and I'm like, oh, well, I got 500 words in, like by the end of the day, I'm more motivated. I'm like, well, I already got 500 words in. Surely I can get 500 more in today. And before you know it, like you're reaching your goals. So those are the things that I would recommend.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I have that addiction to the email. I always have to put my phone away because it's like, oh, maybe I have a new one.
Mm-hmm.
You're like supposed to be writing.
Mm-hmm.
Totally get that. It's a thing. Well, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for coming and for hanging out and chatting with us. And for you guys watching, if you want to learn more about Sara Ella and all of her awesome books and read all of her fairy tale retellings, go to saraella.com.